Welcome to this mini bonus season of the Comfortably Hungry podcast, where yesterday's dinner is tomorrow's history. If you're a peckish person who is curious about the history of food and drink, with a sprinkling of theatrical intrigue, then you're definitely in the right place. Over the last few episodes, Diane Purkiss, Sheila, Cavanagh and Will Tosh have helped me unpick what some of the food references in Shakespeare's plays reveal about life in early modern England. Today, I thought it would be fun to find out more about some of the foods that are less popular today or have entirely disappeared. But before our thoughts turn to our stomachs, let's consider sack, a drink that Sir John Falstaff was inordinately fond of. At the recent Serve It Forth Food History Festival, I had a lively discussion with Ewan Fernie, Emma Smith and Brigitte Webster on whether Falstaff should be considered a glutton or a gourmand. My guests were quick to point out that in Falstaff's eyes, food played second fiddle to sack. So what was it about this drink that made it so appealing, not only to Falstaff, but our entire nation in Shakespeare's day? I wanted to find out a bit more about the origins of this drink, so I had a chat with Victoria González Gordón, Chief Sustainability Officer at González Byass. Today I'm joined by Victoria González Gordón, Chief Sustainability Officer at González Byass. Welcome to the podcast, Victoria.
Thank you very much, Sam. A pleasure to be here.
Can you tell me a little bit more about yourself and González Byass? So I know I've pronounced that really badly. My Spanish is virtually non-existent these days. I used to be able to speak it when I was much younger.
Well, to tell you the truth, here in Spain, we say González Byass, but Byass or Byass, he was our agent and then part of our company, and he was English. So probably it was pronounced Byass. I don't know. Over there. Well, I'm Vicky or Victoria. I'm a Jerezana, born and raised in Jerez. I am a member of the González family, which is the family owner of González Byass. We are now in 5th and 6th generation. The company was founded in Jerez, southern Spain, in 1835 by Manuel María González. He was my great-great-grandfather. Some of our best-known brands from Jerez are Tío Pepe or the VORS sherries. Our brandies Soberano and Lepanto. And some years ago, the company expanded and we have now wineries in other regions of Spain, for example, in Rioja, where we have Beronia. So total of 12 different wineries around Spain, also Chile and Mexico. So I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for the company. Well, moving forward in all sustainability matters, of course, and I'm also president of the González Byass Foundation, which is maybe more linked to your program, because the foundation is dedicated to organizing and preserving and also promoting the historical heritage of the company, of sherry wines and the family. Yeah.
So we are very fond of sherry in the UK and have been for centuries. But in my world, as a food historian, I'm more used for it to be called sack. So can you explain what sack is exactly and how it differs from other wines? And where does the word come from? Because that doesn't even sound like a Spanish word.
There's many different theories about this. And well, what I'm going to tell you is what is written in the history books, because of course our company did not exist in the 16th century, when that was the moment where sack was more popular, let's say, no? We have a third generation family member, which is called Manuel González Gordón. He wrote one of the best books about sherry. And well, I've been reading it, and what he says is that sack could be applied to wines other than sherries. Sometimes it has also been applied to sweet wines coming from Jerez, called sherry sack, from Malaga sack, or Canary Islands, Canary sack. But the first name placed was entitled to priority. So the most common reference was to sherry. Then he says that there are many theories. Maybe it came from Japanese liquor sake, maybe from a French word sec or dry, or maybe from the raids carried out by the English when they sacked the coasts from Cadiz, which maybe it's another part of the history. But in his opinion, and the most common opinion, is that it comes from the word saca, which means extraction. So extracting wine out of the barrel. In Spanish, this is called saca. And also that in the 16th century, it was applied to wines exported to England, coming from different regions.
Okay, so how does sherry then differ from other wines, or sack differ from other wines then?
Well, sherry is a wine that is fortified. This is something that makes it different. Of course, some other differences of Jerez is where it comes from. So it comes from the town or the region of Jerez. It only can be done here. Normally, it's a wine that is fortified, so there is alcohol added to the wine, and there's a range of wines that is not produced in any other part of the world, like a fino or like an oloroso.
So it's fortified, and I mean, it's wonderful stuff. But do we have any idea what it would have been like? Would there have been the variety that we have nowadays with sherry? Because obviously sherry we can get nowadays, you've mentioned fino, but that's completely different from the other end of the scale where you have PX, or Pedro Jimenez, which is incredibly sweet. So do we have any idea how sherry would have been in the past?
No, it must have been really, really different. In the 16th century, I'm telling you about. At that time in the region, there were many different grape varieties, even red, white, so nothing to do in that. Many wines were probably, well, what you found in England, probably sweet because of dry very hot temperatures here probably made fermentation stop, and also due to fortification, which sometimes also stopped fermentation. So probably at that time it was sweet, but this is something we don't know.
So sherry's obviously been made for a very, very long time in Spain or in Jerez. Do we have any idea of how long it's been made there and how the process came about? Why did they decide to fortify it? Was it because of, as you say, the fermentation stopping at a certain point?
Looking back at that time, normally the wines that were sold were young wines, recently fermented. Apparently, main market would have been exports, probably because they paid better. So most of the wine was dedicated to exports. And taking in mind that the wine needed to do a very long journey, they decided to fortify to make it more stable, because as they were young, otherwise they would maybe change too much during that very long period. Then in the, I think it's 18th century, there was the Gremio de Vinateros. This would be something called like Vintners Guild, something like that, was established, and they had very, very strict rules. Between other things, they prohibited aging the wine. So producers needed to sell during the year the wine they have produced. So then again, they needed to fortify the wine to make it more stable for the long journeys. So until this was finished, this guild, and that was in the 19th century, from that moment, fortification was used as a tool for producing wines, or to make the wine the style you wanted to make it. So you fortified the wine to different levels to achieve different styles. Sherry is a complex word.
I'm sure it is. And one day I would love to go to Jerez and taste it in situ. I think it's having a bit of a resurgence now in the UK, actually. Are you seeing that?
Yes. And this has been happening for some, I would say, 10 years, 15 years. I can't say how long, but yes, this is happening. So now we see, you mentioned before the Sherry Week, many sherry bars out in the city, new styles that are not new, because many of them are coming from the old days, like selling wines en rama, like we do our Tío Pepe en rama. So this means direct from the barrel, as you would drink it in the old days.
Yeah.
The palmas, this is wines that are sort of new, maybe 10 years since we have been making them. These are old styles of wine that we have, how do you say, revived? I don't know the word for that. So we see there's a change in consumers, that people like trying different wines and like, knowing more about wine than they did before. So it's a good moment. Yes.
Well, that's good to hear because I love sherry. So I've come to it quite late, I have to say, because I didn't used to like it when I was younger, but now I absolutely adore the stuff. I'm curious to learn, actually, Victoria, are there any challenges going forward for the sherry industry because of climate change? Because I know certain parts of France are struggling or starting to struggle with the increased temperatures. Champagne springs to mind, for example.
Yes, well, in Jerez, for example, this year has been a bit of a challenge because we had a very, very hot period during, when was it? Beginning of August. So temperatures got really, really high. So that made us need to run to pick up the grape, but we needed to wait until it was prepared, not to be collected. So yes, we see the harvest is earlier every year. Also, well, in Jerez, we cannot irrigate. We are not allowed to irrigate. So we use a technique which is called aserpiado. This is kind of doing holes into the soil to retain water when it rains so that the water can filter in and can feed the plant during the year. So in this way, we are sort of prepared more than other regions where maybe they don't have they also have a lack of water. But yes, we see, for example, that harvest is happening earlier. And of course, you need to wait until the right moment. So maturity is changing. Yes.
Thank you so much. It's been very interesting talking to you today. And thank you for your time. And I shall look forward to raising a glass to yourself and the company going forward.
Thank you very much, Sam. My pleasure. I'm looking forward for that glass of sherry here.
Oh, one day I will get there. If you've listened to the recent episode with Will Tosh from Shakespeare's Globe on food and sex in the Bard's plays, you may recall us discussing the saucy symbolism of medlars in Romeo and Juliet. But what exactly is this strange fruit, and why was it so popular in the early modern period? To answer this question, I spoke to Jane Steward of the Eastgate Larder, who makes beautiful medlar jelly and is the author of Medlars Growing and Cooking. So today I am joined by Jane Steward, who is the author of this wonderful book on medlars. And we're going to be talking about this curious fruit. But before we do that, can you explain a bit about yourself, Jane, and why you love medlars?
Thank you, Sam. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you today. It's lovely to see you again after some time. Medlars, gosh, well, nobody else was focusing on the medlar on a specific subject basis in the UK when I first got interested in them back in 2015. The big trigger for me developing an interest in something other than what I had been doing, which was being a business coach, was an illness that I didn't know I had, that I was diagnosed with and then successfully cured of. And this prompted a huge sea change in my thinking about how I was living my life in the beautiful county of Norfolk, which we'd only moved to 3 years previously. We had a sentimental attachment to medlars. We'd been given a medlar tree when we got married, David and I, in 2010. I dug it up in 2012 and moved it here to Norfolk when we came here. And my mum gave us some medlar trees for my birthday that year. And so we had a pretty little avenue of them. And I thought that was going to be it. Anyway, as we know, life can throw all sorts of things at us. And as I was very fortunate to find that my cancer was not so advanced that I had a horrible time ahead of me, I really felt that what I wanted to do was to embrace a completely different way of living and working, and to be more connected to the place that had given me back my life. So, what is it about the medlar that I love? Well, the ornamental characteristics of medlar trees are, I think, fantastic. The flowers are beautiful. They come late in the flowering season, usually in May. They're beautiful, open-faced, 5-petaled, creamy white with yellow stamens, perfect landing pads for honeybees, I always think. And in weather like we've had this year, where there has been a warm rather than a cold and wet spring, it has been a year where the flowers have really welcomed all kinds of pollinators. And it seems to me, looking at my trees now in the month of October, that every single flower that I was admiring in the spring has actually been pollinated and turned into a fruit, which is feeling slightly overwhelming at the moment. But anyway, we won't talk about that.
So when is the ideal time to harvest? I know it's probably variable according to where you live in the country. I'm in Sussex and you're in Norfolk, but when roughly are we talking about?
When the tree wants to give up the fruit, when the growing cycle, all fruit has a growing cycle, and the medlar has a growing cycle of about 180 days. The flowering season runs for about a month to 5 weeks. So you're going to have a rolling wave of harvest opportunities. And the cue that I look for is when the fruit wants to detach itself easily from the tree. And I test that simply by shaking the branches. I went round and shook lots of branches on Sunday. Today's Tuesday. I will do it again probably tomorrow, just to see whether there's any change, because we're getting very close. Everything else in the garden has been early. Medlars clearly want to do things their way, as usual. Nothing changes. So it's less about where you live and more about where your tree has got to, where that fruit has reached in terms of its own growing cycle. And just patience is the hardest thing to garner when it comes to dealing with all these tasks. There's always the urge to sort of get on and get ahead and, I've got time today. And having gathered up windfall and other collision fruit into a basket, which I've had sitting in my bletting room now for 2 weeks. And I did a little vid about this on Sunday, just looking at individual fruit from the bottom of the basket. There has been no bletting going on. So the fruit is clearly not ready to start bletting. So patience, everyone, please. Your tree will signal, and it will signal just by giving up the fruit onto the ground when you shake a branch. When they're ready, they're really ready. It'll be like shaking golf balls off.
Okay, so both of us obviously grow medlars and we're very familiar with them. So perhaps we ought to explain a little bit about bletting, because I know this is one of those things that people don't understand or don't really get, because I may not be the only fruit that blets, but it's the only fruit that I blet anyway. So what is bletting?
It's an entirely natural process that a fruit wants to go through when it has completed its growing and wants to attain a full state of ripening. And that involves internal changes to the flesh of the fruit. So the fully grown fruit will be hard. In the case of medlar, will be hard, tannic, astringent, pectin rich. So if you're into pectin for preserving, little pectin bombs is what you'll have. And this natural process starts on the inside of the fruit. And with it, this entirely natural process, all we humans need to do is to have gathered the fruit, if that's what we want to do, and put it somewhere in a natural environment where we can keep an eye on it. It doesn't need to be prodded and poked every day. But what will happen is that from the inside out, the fruit will start to change character. It will develop brown colour. It will replace the sort of tannic astringents with levels of sugar, which mainly are sorbitol rather than high levels of sucrose or fructose. There's less actual sugar in a medlar than there is in an apple or a pear, I understand.
Oh, interesting.
And the sorbitol, according to scientific research that's been done in some of the medlar homeland countries in Central Europe, Turkey, Romania, Poland, that's why they're very good as a laxative. It's the sorbitol that does it.
Fair enough. In case anyone was wondering.
Well, I do like to make sure. Well, yes, in the same way that when they're in the pectin bomb fully grown state, a tincture made with fruit that's been boiled and drunk, as the Anglo-Saxons said, will solve the problems of a sore tummy. So if you've got a sore tummy, which is a loose tummy, it'll help dry that up. And that, of course, can be a killer.
Yes.
Literally.
Yes, of course, yes.
Advanced dehydration is very difficult for humans to deal with. Could this, as a sidebar, be the reason that humans took an interest in medlars at all? I don't know. We will never know, but it can't be ruled out. So back to bletting. So this is very straightforward. It's entirely natural, and you get a transformation in the fruit from hard, impenetrable, tannic, white flesh to soft, brown, sweet, fragrant, delicious flesh that will actually make a very fine table fruit. Nobody ever thinks of medlars as table fruit. They make absolutely fantastic table fruit. That's probably how Henry VIII used to enjoy
I think in one of Shakespeare's plays, I forget which play, I think it's Rosalind, and she talks about the fact it's rotten being a virtue. It's not really rotten though, is it? Because I think that's a bit of a misnomer. People go, you have to wait for them to be rotten before you can eat them. But I think that's doing them a bit of a disservice, isn't it? Because they were really, really popular, weren't they? As you say, in the early modern period.
They were
really popular.
They were very popular.
And as a table fruit, not cooked necessarily.
So yes, so this was where the medlar really fitted in. If you had a taste for the sweet, the medlar fruit was a winter sweet treat in the run-up to that season of turnip eating or whatever it was that the population had to deal with.
The hungry gap. Yeah,
Tesco's didn't exist. Exactly, the hungry gap. I shouldn't make light of this. I know it was a very serious and challenging issue. But yes, the sweetness, the table fruit. And interestingly now, I think medlars are so closely aligned in people's minds with quinces, which always have to be cooked. The assumption is that medlars do too. They do not. And some cultivars are absolutely delicious as a table fruit. I'm well known for my championing of the Iranian medlar, which is divine as a table fruit. So good I don't cook with it. But the Breda, which is a pretty little cultivar named after a town in the Netherlands, has got lovely creamy flesh with slight notes of cinnamon and satsuma. Sadly, the bigger cultivars, like the large Dutch and the large Russian, which look so much more sensible to tackle as a table fruit, have a less interesting texture. They have a good flavour, but a less palatable texture.
I usually use the analogy that it's a little bit like a cooked date. When you've cooked dates down, the texture of in terms of its sweetness and mouthfeel. Would you say that's accurate? I mean, I guess it depends on the cultivar.
I would agree. And actually, I think it was Xanthi Clay, who the food writer, who coined that expression, the English date. I think that was in the article that she wrote for one of the national newspapers, dailies, and was championing for the first time Mark Diacono's amazing sticky medlar toffee pudding recipe, which has become a bit of a highly anticipated seasonal feature in this house, certainly. But actually, I think that it was Nikki Segnet of the Flavour Thesaurus who coined the expression that the medlar tastes like a date that is sucked on a lemon.
Okay. Not sure I get the sucked on a lemon bit.
Well, so the thing about the medlar, and I pick this up when I'm eating them as table fruit, you've got this sort of date, well, you've got the date-like colour, the brownness, you've got the sweetness, but there is this slight finishing hit of a citrus note.
No, I do see that. I think when you say sucking on a lemon, mostly because when we say someone's sucking on a lemon, it's meant they've got very sour disposition. So I get there is an acidity there. I will give you that. And yes, I love them in all forms, cooked and otherwise. I actually do have a sticky toffee pudding recipe in my forthcoming book. So using medlars, sticky medlar pudding recipe. So it's perfect for that. But it's also, as you say, you can enjoy it just as a fruit in its own right. And it comes at the right time because, as you say, it's most of the other fruits have gone by the wayside. So they do have some interesting nicknames. Can we go through some of those and how they came to be associated with this, what I think is a lovely fruit?
Yes, there are ways in which one can look at the fruit and see analogies with different parts of, whether it's animal or human bodies. I mean, let's be blunt about it. It's not something one likes to discuss necessarily in polite society, whatever. But here we're interested in the history, and this is the reality of life. And actually, far more people remember the name Dog's Bottom than they do medlar.
Is that in France? Cul de chien. Is that in France?
Cul de chien in France. And in France, it's really useful to know that it's a cul de chien because linguistically, the French language uses the same word, nefla, for both the Japanese loquat and Mespelis germanica, which is the medlar that you and I are talking about. They're completely different fruits. They are very, very distant cousins in the wider Rosaceae family, but one fruits in the summer and the other one fruits in November.
So where can people get medlars if they don't grow them themselves? where's the best place to pick them up?
In terms of buying them in shops, they just don't turn up in the modern food retail system. So you can forget anything that resembles a supermarket or even a chain food store, which is run, on a local basis. You might find them turning up in a basket at a market, a food market, but it requires there to be a tree nearby with an owner who's offered them, probably. They're not grown commercially. So really you need to identify a tree, maybe in a local park, or maybe it's a National Trust property or in an ecclesiastical setting, which are common places to see medlar trees. Find out who's in charge of the spot and, arrange terms to get access so that you can pick them. I am talking to a well-known slow food business about making some of my medlars available for sale online through them. And there will be an announcement about it.
That's really good to hear.
I am more excited about this, Sam, than anything else I've done over the last 10 years, because it feels like a breakthrough moment.
Well, that's been so interesting talking to you. So I shall put a link to your book in the show notes so that people can order it for themselves. And I'm going to say, go forth and find some medlars. Or cul de chien, if you're listening in France.
Cul de chien. I hope you will have listeners there.
And that's wonderful. Thank you very much.
Great pleasure. Thank you, Sam.
Cheese is rarely couched in positive terms in Shakespeare's plays, as it was generally regarded as something eaten by the lower orders of society, as we've heard in previous episodes. But there is one specific reference that has always piqued my curiosity. In The Merry Wives of Windsor, Bardolph calls Abraham Slender a Banbury cheese when Slender accuses him of getting him drunk to pick his pocket. I've often wondered what it is about this cheese that made it so ripe to be lobbed as an insult. So I asked cheesemonger Ned Palmer his thoughts. So welcome to the podcast, Ned, and thank you for joining me today. Before we sort of get started talking about Banbury cheese, can you explain a bit about yourself and why you love cheese so much?
Thanks for having me. It's really nice to be on. So yeah, I describe myself as a freelance cheesemonger. It's a job I invented, and it is the best job in the world, I'm afraid. And what I do for a living is I talk about cheese. And that means I get to eat a lot of cheese and drink a lot of nice wine, and that's called research and is tax deductible. So it is the most fun. And it was totally accidental. I was kind of working in the theatre, which means I wasn't really working, and I was resting, which being unemployed. And my friend Todd said, come and sell my cheese with me at Borough Market. And he makes Trethown's Galway Cavanagh. But anyway, I went down to Borough. This is in 2000. And I'd never done retail. I'd never done anything to do with proper good food. Quite like cheese, didn't know anything about it. And I had a piece of his Cavanagh, and I realised that all the other cheese I'd ever eaten was rubbish. It might not, if people have only had supermarket Cavanagh, that would sound like a weird thing to say, but proper good, unpasteurised, farmhouse cheese, you've already rind, cleaning into the rind, it's really complex. I didn't know that cheese could be like that. And a short while later, he got me a job at Neal's Yard Dairy, saying, I'll get you a job if you stop bothering me. And that was 25 years ago. And before then, I never stuck a job longer than a couple of years. So I feel like there should be a warning, like, you don't know what's going to happen if you eat a really nice piece of cheese. And so I worked at Neal's Yard Dairy for about 6 years. And I think I did everything you could possibly do other than own it.
We're here specifically to talk about Banbury cheese, which is mentioned as an insult, but we'll come back to that, in Shakespeare's play The Merry Wives of Windsor. So what was Banbury cheese? Because am I right in thinking there isn't a Banbury cheese or a specific Banbury cheese today? Or am I incorrect in that assumption?
There is not a Banbury cheese. I mean, as far as I know, because one thing about cheese, it's lovely is you get new cheeses all the time. I come to think that another thing that's lovely, I'd say more in the last 10, 15 years, has been a sort of resurgence of people digging up old recipes and trying to make cheeses. say, in the old style. So it's not impossible that we would get Banbury cheese. Until the last few months, I really knew almost nothing about it, other than it's called Banbury, and people thought it was good. So it was clearly pop. You see little mentions of it in bits of cheese prose, such as there was. And it's interesting that it's thin, by which I'm fairly sure they mean, thin in that dimension. If you think of a thick cylinder.
Yes, like cheddar. Yeah.
Yeah, like a cheddar, say. Well, it's not that. Thin could mean meagre. It could mean low fat, skinned milk cheese, which wasn't very nice and was for the poor people to eat, richly got.
That's what I've heard when I've sort of tried to investigate what it was. I've heard that especially because it's used as an insult in this particular play, although I agree it is in other texts outside of Shakespeare, it's spoken about quite positively. People have said that one of the reasons the character is called Slender and the reason he's called you Banbury cheese is because it's, as you say, thin in depth. And then when you pared the rind away, there wasn't much cheese that you could eat, apparently.
I mean, I find it really fascinating that it's an insult, because you'd think if you really wanted to insult someone, you'd call them after cheese that everyone thought was rubbish.
Well,
and it's also fascinating to me that it is thin and not rubbish, which sort of by inference means it has to be a soft cheese. Because if it was thin and a hard cheese, it would dry out. It just would be rubbish. It would be dry and miserable. And there were cheeses around like that. So the Suffolk cheeses that were once, or East Anglian cheeses once, the big cheese of the cheese world. And because the buyers in London cheesemongers forced them to skin the fat off to make butter, which it could sell for a lot of money. And they ended up with a cheese so hard and dry, it was called Suffolk Bang or Thump. And big red poems about it, insulting poems. The Navy, the sailors wouldn't eat it. And these are blokes who'd eat a hard attack with weevils and they wouldn't eat it. So Banbury can't be that, because otherwise people wouldn't think it was good. So recently, a rather marvellous thing has been discovered. It's a pamphlet on cheese. It's in the Leeds University cookbook collection now, and it's a national treasure because it's the earliest written text that really describes cheeses, and particularly local named cheeses, which is kind of what you're asking me about.
Mm.
So one thing about Banbury is it says it's second only to Cheshire.
Wow, that's a high praise indeed, isn't it?
Wow. And Cheshire cheese was the cheddar of Britain until the mid-19th century. It really was so highly prized. Peeps loved it. The French bought so much of it from the port of Chester that in France they now have a cheese called Chester, which they think is English. It's not, but it's a memory of when Chester was the powerhouse of British cheese export. So second only to Cheshire means it must be really, really good. So with great excitement, I read through this manuscript, and it says it's soft. That is the only clearly descriptive word about Banbury cheese in this manuscript. So somewhat frustrating. It said it's soft. And then it goes into a big, longer description about it, but all it is says stuff that it isn't like it's a just ripeness. It's never clammy. Well, that's good, I guess. Nor hardly compacted, nor rare and porous, but of a good, reasonable firmness, which confuses me slightly if it's soft. But he still doesn't really tell you what it looks like or feels like. So I'm going to guess that it's like brie, because it's soft and thick. It makes me immediately think of brie, which is a mould-ripened cheese. Mould-ripened means it's got that generally white, but often with orange browny flecks, and it's a sort of rumpled texture if you get the good one and not the market one. Brie's very rich, full-fat cheese, lovely golden paste, so it would be good. People think it's good. Also, brie has an ancient pedigree in that they were making brie in medieval France, and it's very popular because it was made near Paris. It's popular with the kings and the aristocracy, very posh cheese. So it seems to me entirely plausible that people in Britain might have got a recipe for method to make brie, that people were out there looking at the French cheese market and thought, gee, this is great. Let's make it. He does also say, it's the sort of thing I find super interesting. He says that it's called Banbury not only because it's made in Banbury, but because it has such a good reputation that then people are making Banbury style, but they just call it Banbury. So, for example, now one of our greatest Cheshires is made in Shropshire. There's next to it. But it's a start. Well, cheddar, you can make cheddar in Azerbaijan if you want. We never managed to sort of protect that name. But I think it's really fascinating that Banbury was so good that people turned it into a style.
So this brings me on to my next question. If it was second only to Cheshire, which we can still buy today, and obviously factory Cheshire is entirely different from that produced by people like Applebee's, who is one of my favourite cheeses.
Great cheese.
It's a great cheese. Why did Banbury cheese disappear?
I think it's fascinating, isn't it? And I've got lots of thoughts. So those cheese, we've just mentioned Cheshire. The main cheeses on the British cheese board are quite large, hard cheeses. And I think they would be very successful economically because you can ship them. So you can ship them to London and they won't come to Holland, and London is going to be as always, from whenever William took it, was going to be a great lucrative place to sell cheese to. And we know they had cheesemongers in there from Athelstan's time because he was taxing them. By the way, he taxed them more at Christmas, so we know that Christmas was a good time for cheesemongers even back then, because it is now.
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
So the big hard cheese, you can ship them, they ship them to France. Our cheese was really popular on the continent in that early modern period. So I wonder if in one sense, those cheeses like Cheshire and its siblings outperformed Banbury. Was the market for Banbury smaller because it would be, if it was a soft creamy cheese, maybe it's higher value, which then has a smaller market. Cheshire, very popular with posh people, and people loved it. But also quite a practical cheese that you could, I guess, and maybe have different grades of it, feed a workforce on it as well. So I wonder about that. And I mean, really with the Industrial Revolution, when cheddar took over, I think it was more amenable than Cheshire to a sort of industrial process. It's a tougher curd and it's less easy to screw up. Cheshire is hard to make, it's easy to mess it up. So again, you've got a different kind of economy where it's much more about economy of scale, and it's been much harder to make a soft, fancy cheese fit in that context. And then jumping forward a lot, in World War II, the government just outright banned the soft cheeses and blue cheeses. I think part out of all those reasons for durability and send it to distant markets, also because the ration was an ounce of cheese a day. It's hard to cut an ounce. It's hard to cut very consistent ounces, and it's a lot easier if that's hard cheese. And I wonder if there were any descendants of Banbury left by then that they were wiped out, finally, by the war. Because I know we did lose a lot of cheeses. The cheesemakers were older and they didn't, they'd kind of retired after the war. They were getting a guaranteed milk check then from the government. So why bother making cheese? But I haven't noticed it in the 19th century. I mean, I haven't looked exhaustively, and it would be difficult to prove a negative, but I haven't seen it being mentioned after the 18th century. So I do wonder.
There's a book published in 1917 on cheese making that you make reference to quite often in...
Dora Saker?
Yes. So she doesn't mention anything about Banbury cheese. I know that's 1917, so that's obviously way later, but there's no mention of it.
No, I mean, it feels like it might have already died out. I mean, there is, I'm a big fan of determinism. I'm a sucker for really deterministic arguments, like it died out because economics. But I love what Alice Roberts said in one of her books, sometimes things just happen.
Yeah.
And so, possibly a maker died, and maybe there was just one cheesemaker left at one point, which already still requires the question why it got down to that. But it might have been outperformed by French cheeses, and perhaps as the sort of transport networks improved and we could get more soft French cheeses in better condition.
Are there any cheeses today that we think might be similar? They're not called Banbury cheese, but if we think it is a mould ripened cheese, are there any cheeses today that we think we could say, well, that might be a little similar to what was being made back then?
Well, I mean, if it was in the style of Brie, then Baron by God, which is fantastic, absolutely fantastic. Brie-like cheese from Suffolk, from Bungay, made by the Quick family. And they did go out and learn from, I believe it's Danger, the great Pratt family of great brie makers in France. And there's some specific techniques to doing that, like ladling, that you want to nail. And I don't know if this is illegal, but I think I would be hard pressed in a blind tasting to distinguish it from a brie. So possibly that. I was also wondering about another kind of soft cheese, which is in France, you would have Saint-Nectaire. And it's still mold ripened, but it's a very different rind. It's sort of often kind of grey, not furry, slightly pinkish. And there is a cheese called St. Helena, which is actually made in the same dairy by Julie Cheney, her cheesemaker, which is like Saint-Nectaire, and it could have been like that. In fact, those very white breeds that we recognise as brie were kind of developed in the 19th century when they were able to isolate moulds and get one mould that would then colonise the cheese, make that more uniform experience. And before then, bries were kind of multicoloured, often red or blue. So it might be that St. Helena is a more authentic image of a late medieval, early modern soft cheese, in that it's got some greyish, some red notes, a few different microorganisms growing on it. So maybe St. Helena, which is another cracking cheese, I think broadly based on Saint-Nectaire. I mean, if we're wrong and it was a harder or semi-hard cheese and it was just relatively thin compared to a big sort of cylinder, then I would possibly say Trafalgar Score with Cavanagh, which, when I read the descriptions of the first British recipes, they call it new milk cheese because you make it with morning milk, which is the new milk of the day, and you add a bit of the cream from the evening milk. And that size and shape of the Galway is very much as they describe it. So that is firmer with a centre that's like a moist crumble, and then on the outside it's got a darker creamy edge, and then it's got a rind. And again, the rind is sort of mostly grey with a bit of wrinkle, maybe a bit of pink from a sort of more multicultural population micro. So that's 3. How's that? Is that all right?
We can have 3. I mean, we don't know at the end of the day, do we? But it would be lovely. I'd love someone to try to recreate it. I know it's difficult without a recipe because you're just guessing, aren't you? But it would be nice if someone would try to resurrect it.
Wouldn't it? I'd love it if we could find a recipe for Banbury. It would be so cool. Here is a call going out to food historians everywhere. Let's make some cheese from the recipes, even if we have to guess at it. And we do have people like Thomas Tusser or Gervais Markham, these agricultural writers, who are to some degree describing what it was supposed to be. So we could guess at it.
Right, there's the call to action. I will get all my food historian buddies to listen to this and get galvanised and make cheese. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. And thank you again for chatting to me about cheese, because it is one of my favourite subjects, one of my favourite foods. So I've thoroughly enjoyed our chat today. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Helen.
Well, I don't know about you, but I've got a craving for some cheese with a ripe medlar or 2 and a glass of sherry right now. You'll be pleased to hear that I've made good use of these ingredients, with the exception of Banbury cheese, of course, in my latest book, Much Ado About Cooking, written in collaboration with Shakespeare's Globe, which is out now. Book launches are always a special time for authors. They're also quite demanding on our time, what with promotional activities and whatnot. So please bear with me as I put the finishing touches to season 4 of the Comfortably Hungry podcast. which will be flooding the airwaves soon, I hope. Don't forget that you can listen to the earlier episodes from this mini-season and previous seasons on all things dark, chocolate and austerity wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, don't forget to rate and review the podcast, as it really will help other listeners discover Comfortably Hungry. You'll find links to my guest books and mine on the bookshelf page of the Comfortably Hungry Substack. You can subscribe to the Comfortably Hungry Substack for free, but if you become a paid subscriber, you get access to recipes and extra recordings, such as the extended interviews with Jane Steward and Ned Palmer, which will be released shortly. I'll be back soon, but until then, take care and keep your appetites keen for Season 4 on water. Comfortably Hungry was created, produced, recorded, researched and edited by Sam Bilton, with sound production and mixing by Thomas Dinas of the Delicious Legacy podcast. The music and sound effects are provided by Zapsplat.